Hello and welcome to Mind Shifters Radio. I'm Tim Hayes. I'm your host for the first hour, and today is Monday, May 24th, 2021. As always, we are grateful to those joining us here today as we spend another couple of hours teaching and supporting people in using some of the most powerful, effective, efficient, and accessible tools I've ever encountered. Accessible because these tools are available absolutely free at the website whyagain.org. If you go to that website and click on the red and white bullseye or the link in the upper left-hand corner of most pages that says Start Here, it'll take you to a page where you can download and read Chapter 24 of Dr. Michael Rice's book. The book is titled, Why Is This Happening to Me Again? And that chapter of that book contains a narrative description of the primary tool in this work, the Reality Management Worksheet, sometimes called the Reality Management Wake-Up Sheet. And it's a tool I've been using to great effect for over 16 years to improve the quality of my life and relationships, manage my emotions, and turn any negative emotional state into part of the infallible guidance system that each of us has been given. If you go to that page after you've downloaded or before you downloaded and read Chapter 24, you can also download the actual worksheet process itself. It's a simple PDF file. You click and download, print it off, and use it as often as you'd like. You can also go to the App Store of your choice and type in the three words Heartland Aramaic Forgiveness and get access to a completely free and private app that contains the Reality Management Worksheet, an abbreviated version of that worksheet process, and a copy of the Dragon Klingon game, which is a wonderful way to introduce these tools to even younger audiences. You can also download from that webpage a host of audio files of shows just like this one, where people have been stepped through the worksheet process or called in to give powerful testimonials about how the active use of that tool has improved their lives. Or we've had some rather in-depth discussions over the past 10-plus years of the dynamics behind the power in that tool. We're also doing the Course in Miracles experiments this year in this show, today being the 144th day of the year. We would normally do Lesson 144, but I'm going to go back, since they're very brief, and review Saturday's lessons with a review of Lesson 123 and 124. They say we begin this review period with the phrase, my mind holds only what I think with God or with the Creator. Lesson 123's review is, I thank my Father for his gifts to me. Lesson 124, let me remember I am one with the Creator. Yesterday's lessons, 143, begin with, my mind holds only what I think with the Creator. And then Lesson 125, in quiet I receive God's Word today. 126, all that I give is given to myself. This is helping us remember we are all connected. Lesson 144, today's review, begins with, again, the thought, my mind holds only what I think with love, with the Creator, with God. And Lesson 127's review is, there is no love but loves. There is no love but creations. Well, Lesson 128, the world I see holds nothing I want. And Pam Grout's book, Course in Miracles Experiment, Lesson 144 is, just beyond the story. She quotes Michael Gungor, who says, yesterday and tomorrow are just wounds and stories. She says, only love is real. This is all there is. My illusions hold nothing I want. Pam writes, by relying on an inventory learned from my family, culture, and past, I miss the teeming energy available in the atomic now. There is great substance within each present moment, just waiting to explode with goodness, and magic and blessings. But by reapplying old, often inappropriate cultural paradigms, I miss the magic. I completely overlook all of the life-empowering data that's trying to stream to me from my inner non-physical self. This traps me in a web of defensive, limiting perceptions. Anytime I'm not in the present moment, that tape loop kicks in and old constrictions and perceptual habits take over. They're infecting my thinking, my actions, and my beliefs. They're also a son of a gun when attempting to be happy or manifest my dreams. None of these habits of thought are true, but because they're buried for the most part, living in my subconscious like rats in the cellar, they subtly play out in my life experience any time I am not, quote, in the now, close quote. My friend Jay calls them BS, belief systems, full of that other kind of BS. Unfortunately, these are the programs I often use to explain, identify, and cope with my life. They run most of the time, even when I'm affirming and intending other things. They always feature me as a separate entity and a separate body that by their very nature are slated for the chopping block. Can we agree these masks and costumes are not our fullest, most eternal selves? That's Pam's view of Lesson 144, a review of Lesson 127 and 128. My mind holds only what I think with God, the Creator, and love. There is no love but the Creator's. The world I see holds nothing I want. So that's our Course in Miracles lesson in review for today. And we have 50 minutes left. Time for conversation. 563-999-3581 is our number. If you call that number and press 1, we can have a conversation. So what's on your mind today? What might we help you with? How has your weekend been? I had a weekend of doing some of my own personal work related to the triggering that happened on Thursday night during the support group that I mentioned in the show on Friday. And what happened in the support group was we were playing a video of a talk between Gabor Mate and Adyashanti. And Adyashanti was asking, or Gabor was asking Adyashanti about stories from very, very high-level Buddhist teachers that it was later revealed they were either having sex with their community members or followers, or they were sexually molesting those followers. And my response was to feel kind of a nausea-inducing rage. And so I knew instantly, okay, this is mine. I brought this in here. It can't get triggered by words, sounds, vibrations through a speaker. It's my meaning for this. And I know some of the things we teach. One of the things that is in the bottom line observations list that I hand out to people in the first or second session. So rather than flipping through social media or getting stuck watching television or listening to talk radio, I'm more often than not spending my time between sessions or when I'm doing domestic work at home listening to a book on tape or really good. And I remembered having the thought, oh, I wish I had been there. Wish I could have seen that. So I did a worksheet or two on that. And one of the things that came up when I did a worksheet or two on the upset, hearing about these spiritual teachers that were basically saying one thing and doing another, I flashed back to several memories of being in a Catholic school with, and basically surrounded by, we were constantly under the, whatever you call it, guidance, tutelage, supervision of nuns. And on a regular basis, they would walk around with scowls on their faces and a wooden ruler with a metal edge and look for any excuse to whack us on the knuckles or hit us in the back of the head. And that series of memories came up when I was processing the nausea-inducing anger at hearing that some Buddhist teachers were sexually molesting their students. So I did several of those worksheets and realized that I was holding lots and lots of hurt underneath that anger, and I didn't feel safe. I was being sent from a loving home into a school that was supposed to be a high-quality school, and yet we were supervised by and surrounded by people who talked a lot about love and about Jesus and all of the religious stuff, but they practiced anger and bitterness and violence. So I am in far better shape today than I was Thursday or Friday, having done some of that processing and having seen where some of the sadness and pain that underlie the anger, where they came from. And on my plans for, checking it out, I haven't done it yet, but I will do so sometime this week, is I will review that segment of the talk with Gabor and Adyashanti and see if listening to that same litany of abuses and the teachers involved, if that produces the same level of anger as it did before. So that's just an example of how this work, in my 16 plus years of experience in doing it, continues to help me live a more joyful, a more gratitude-based, a more productive life. And it truly helps me use my negative emotional states as part of a guidance system. Because, prior to Thursday night support group, if you had asked me, how are you doing with all of that trauma that you sustained in grade school and high school, I would have said, pretty well. I'm pretty much cleared up. I'm no longer holding a lot of bitterness and resentment for the religious instruction, and I'm able to have some level of gratitude for the quality of the education. If you had asked me prior to Thursday support group, I wouldn't have said, well, I'm still carrying a lot of trauma from, having been constantly vigilant every time there was a nun around that I might get hit. And often for doing something I had no idea was unacceptable, right? I mean, I would frequently living in that hypervigilance, living in that fear of doing something wrong. I clearly downloaded a lot of negative energies and beliefs about myself, that I don't understand things, that I don't get things right, that I have to constantly keep trying. And the more I have events like this where something happens on the outside and I interpret it in a way that resonates that upset, it gives me yet another opportunity to go in and unload and dismantle some of those false beliefs about myself and some of the traumatic energies. So, do you have a similar story? Do you have an area where you're stuck or triggered? 563-999-3581. If you call that number and press 1, we can have a conversation. Or do you have a comment or question about this weekend's Course in Miracles lessons? Is there anything about this process that, as you review it or try to do it for yourself, you find frustrating, or you want to give a testimonial about the application of these tools? I was just working with somebody prior to the session that we'll talk about in a minute. Welcome, Susan.
Hi, Tim. Dr. Tim. This topic is the fact that you needed to go somewhere else in a different area of your life, which to my mind didn't directly connect, shows you how effective the tools can be and how a trigger you can be led to the truth of what you need to face, even with an approximate trigger. Now, this trigger might not have seemed approximate to you. Okay, I'm going to go backtrack. I have so many thoughts that they're all coming out in an unintelligible pile. I have a sister-in-law, Tim's youngest sister, who joined a religious organization, and she had a guru. And it turns out after the guru had died, it was discovered that he had done the same with many of his students. One of the women who worked most closely with him, who was given a fantastic title and went on trips all around the world with him, has written a book about the fact that she was used by him, and yet she was always confused because he would do what he wanted to do with her, and then he would do it in a very impersonal way and justify it as being part of the release he needed as a spiritual director or some crazy thing. And she was in love with him, which is often the case of students who admire their teacher very much, and they're vulnerable. It happens in universities too, and I had a professor who I was involved with in that way when I was a freshman at college. I thought he was the most amazing man, and he thought I was amazing in a different way, and there's that story. But I've never looked upon that as the kind of, maybe I haven't faced it, the heavy trigger that yours was for you. But I remember someone telling me that oftentimes when a person is in very high positions, very much admired, maybe public, very powerful, there are often these stories of a hypersexuality that occurs. It's almost like it's part of the charism, or it's an inflated ego that the person thinks they have a right to do things that under other conditions they wouldn't do. And in the case of my sister-in-law, we asked her, were you ever one of those that he approached? And she said no, and I think I know why. because I was from a wealthy family and a prominent family. Tim's father was a congressman in Washington for years, and it was a well-known Connecticut family, and they had money, and they were supporting this teacher of my sister-in-law. And so he didn't, I suppose he figured she was just totally off limits, or maybe she wasn't attractive to him or something. But you're talking about something that happens a lot, where there's an imbalance of perceived power. And it often happens with people in the religious life. And I've been
and what I'm talking about with it is what I was able to recognize got stirred up in me as a negative emotional response, and what I could do about it with these tools.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about it from the global perspective, or this happens a lot, or and when you're saying perhaps it is a hypersexualization, or perhaps it is this, or perhaps it is that, I don't know what drives that in people. I know that as a general rule, only people who are hurt go out and hurt other people. So the assumption would have to be that in one way or another, these are people who don't feel good enough in and of themselves. They don't know, as the Way of Master would call us, to understand about them. They don't see their perfect innocence and their tremendous ability to achieve whatever they need to achieve without hurting anyone else. So, rather than speculate about what's causing all of that, for this show, for these purposes, I'd rather stick to, okay, does that trigger you when that happens? And what gets triggered in you when that happens? Because as we know, and the Course in Miracles would tell us over and over again, whenever you're healed, you're not healed alone. So if you have an upset that comes up when you hear a story like this, the most productive thing you can do is apply the tool, or whatever tools work for you, whether it's Ho'oponopono or Byron Katie's, questions, or even, I'm going to be interviewing Diedrich later today. He has a 6-step forgiveness, choose again process. So if I'm doing something that's hurting someone else, there's immediate evidence that I don't feel whole and complete, that I'm not consciously aware of my true nature as love and acting from that. And so what can I do to restore that awareness? What can I do to question any old negative beliefs? What can I do to heal from within myself, which is the most I can do for anyone else?
That's good, and I get it. And I will get off the subject because you're absolutely right. You've always said, I'm a practical person, and these are practical tools. And it's true. And so I did get off on that. And I'm not aware of being triggered the way you were. But what you went through led to a lot of speculating on my part. And I can certainly leave off that and get on to a couple of other questions I have.
All right. What would that be?
Okay. In the lesson, my mind holds only what I think with God. The word hold, I've been thinking about hold. My mind doesn't seem to hold what I think with God. My mind is doing a lot of holding about things that are not healthy or helpful or of God at all. So I wondered if you had another word for hold.
Well, in the first place, I would say this teaching that's through all of these lessons in the Course in Miracles, these recent ones, is that it's trying to teach us about the true nature of ourselves, not our conscious, logical, or egoic nature. Right? So yes, I might have all kinds of thoughts, but when they are thoughts based in illusion, they're not real. And that's what so much of the Course is trying to help us understand. It's true at a certain level of consciousness, because my egoic consciousness can believe that I'm a sinner and I'm damaged and broken and unlovable. And that belief doesn't make it true.
Okay.
It does make my experience based in that. So I would use the word contain or contains in exchange for hold. So the truth of my mind is that it only contains the thoughts of the Creator in truth. I keep coming back to this, The Impersonal Life by Joseph S. Benner, and one particular segment in there where it says, no human being has had an actual thought until after that human being awakens to the presence of the divine mind within him or her. Because prior to that, it's all of this conditioned stimulus response business. It's all of what Michael Rice would call this reflexive decision process. It's what's been conditioned in. It's not creative thought. It's not true thinking. And the Impersonal Life with Joseph S. Benner carries the same message. So those two kinds of softening or broadening of those definitions are what I would offer. This is not talking about the racing thoughts, the monkey mind, that bounce around in me. This is talking about the true power of creative thought that comes from being aligned with the one mind.
That's good. I understand.
And understanding that when I do that, the world I see through my eyes holds nothing that I want. And I become aware of what I want and what will fulfill me and what will bring joy at these deeper levels when I'm aligned with the one mind.
And you've gone right on to my second question, which was, the world I see holds nothing that I want, which you just cleared up. So they were practically the same question, I guess. But I'm just going to say that I read an article the other day about some of the more common reactions that people have been reporting in having had a year of being shut down in various ways, limited in their travel and so forth. And that is that they don't want to do anything. They've lost interest in things they were formerly interested in. And so I read that to say, yeah, the world I see holds nothing that I want. On a bad day, I'll think, I don't want to do anything, and yet I certainly don't want to lie around and deal with my brain the way it is. So I get up and I do, thank God, there are mundane, easy, not unpleasant chores to do. But so you've said again that isn't what this means, that the world I see holds nothing that I want because it isn't really real anyway. I'm looking at illusions. I'm looking at a made-up world, and I don't really want that ultimately, but I don't know that I don't want it until I've had some level of enlightenment or something.
Yeah. Well, introduction to the question. Introduction to the understanding that my perception is just this best guess of my senses trying to, figure out what's really out there. What is the world? And, that lesson, what is the world, that Michael Rice summarizes from the Course in Miracles, is one of the more powerful lessons, because it expands. The Course in Miracles expands to a great degree on what you can get a short version of if you search for Anil Seth's video.
Yeah.
ANIL, second name, last name, SETH. If you search on YouTube for Anil Seth and just put in, hallucination of reality or perception,
right,
then you have, what modern science is telling us about what the Course in Miracles has been trying to get us to comprehend. We think that when we look out through our body's eyes, we see the world that's out there, when in truth, all that's happening is this, Michael would call it the carbon-based memory, the brain in our head and our conditioned experiences, our past combines with the current stimulation and our interpretation of it to create a picture or a series of pictures and a belief and a series of conclusions. And so we are not, at any given point in time, with our physical eyes, seeing the truth of what's out there. We're seeing the tiny sliver of what exists in the light spectrum that we call the visible spectrum, because that's the part that's able to be captured by our eyes. But, there are insects that see more. There are other mammals that see more with their eyes. There are birds that see more with their eyes than humans do. But we miss all of that, right? And we train ourselves to believe that we know what's going on based on what we interpret from our senses, without ever really slowing down to realize, wait a minute, our senses are just a tiny slice of the truth of what's happening in the world and all of the various energies that are out there. And then, given that, we say, oh, well, maybe I don't know. But then, on top of that, we have to place everything about our past conditioning, culture, family, etc., that has been training us to make sense in one way or another of whatever it is that hits our senses. And that's a powerful set of interpretations, way, way more powerful than we ever realized. And that's constructing our experience of life.
And we get reinforced because it appears that we all share. If I say, look at that big tree, everybody who walks down my street is going to say, oh, yeah, there's a big tree. We all are kind of reinforcing the seeing of something that we think we see, but we may not be seeing it, but we all agree on what it is. And so we're just thrown back into the illusory world over and over and over again. I listened to Anil Seth's talk a couple of times. I got the gist of what he was saying, but there was stuff in it that I didn't understand. And now I'm beginning to think I ought to listen and listen and listen until I get it, although I didn't think I would ever have the brain cells to understand some of the things he was saying. And he spoke fast. Maybe I could stop it and start it, and or maybe I do get it. I don't know. But anyway, thanks for mentioning it, because I haven't gone back to it in a long time.
Well, and then there are some conclusions at the end that he makes that, are, to my mind, they're quite a jump. I don't know how he got those conclusions, right? But
I remember one of them. What were the others? Do you remember more than one? The one I remember, which is there is nothing to be afraid of. I remember saying, yay! But I didn't understand how he got there from what he was saying.
Yeah, and it was that, and there was something else that I don't recall it right now exactly what it was, but I remember every time I listened to it, I thought, yeah, that's quite a stretch. That's quite a jump. I don't know how he got there from the material he was presenting, but to him it made perfect sense. And to my mind, it's just another wonderful example of how we're all just making sense of this stuff in our own way.
Mm-hmm.
Right? What does it mean when someone says you're beautiful? I have a fabulous example of this. I was working with a woman who, is by all accounts, right? Just she's not horribly scarred, in her skin. Her body is pleasantly shaped according to our current cultural standards. She's well taken care of, clean, dresses well, likes to coordinate the colors of her clothes, does her nails and her hair, all this stuff, right? All these things that you would say she's attractive. But she's had in her past episodes of abuse and trauma. And so she doesn't think so highly of herself at a core level. And so she was out, and she had a daughter that was, 7 or 8 years old, and they were walking into a store through a parking lot, and a gentleman, I have no idea what this person looked like or roughly how old he was, but said, whistled or said, looking good or something like that. And the mother recoiled in horror and anger. But the mother, is a very consciously aware person, and so she started talking to her daughter about it, since she knows her daughter was there and heard this guy. And so she said, did you hear what that person said? And the daughter said, yes. And the mother said, so what do you think he meant by that? Do you think that was rude? Do you think? And the daughter just said, I just think he thinks you look beautiful. So the daughter's interpretation was just as pure and innocent as could be, and the mother's interpretation was filtered by, having seen somebody expose himself to her out in public before when she was a teenager, and probably some questionable dating situations and a stalker in her past and stuff like that. So the mother's interpretation of this simple comment by a stranger was very negative, and her daughter's was just, oh, I think he thinks you look beautiful. Because, of course, in the daughter's eyes, the mother is beautiful. And it's wonderful that this person sees mom as beautiful, too. Well, we're all doing that kind of thing all the time, whether we realize it or not. The distortions that I was putting on this commentary from Thursday night's group are a wonderful example of it. Had almost nothing to do with the truth that there have been spiritual teachers who hide behind their spirituality and use their teachings as a rationalization or a weapon. That's the truth. But that's been true. It's been true for thousands of years, and I don't live all day, every day with a sick feeling in the pit of my stomach and anger, even though it's always been true. Even before I was born, that was true. So if that outside event was causing the sick feeling in my stomach and the anger, I would have been feeling it from the moment of birth, and I would have felt it all the way through, because the outside event has always been true. It's still true. In this very day, there are probably people who are abusing their power with whether it's power and control or sexuality or whatever. So the outside event is clearly not what's causing the nausea in my stomach. It was the interpretation that I threw on this. And I was probably the only one in the support group who felt it as intensely as I did, the way I did. Why? Because I'm the only one in the support group that had the history that I have, and that has the judgment, negative judgment of myself, negative judgment of others, that was resonated by the interpretation I threw on that discussion. Does that make sense?
It does, and it also amazes me because to me it seemed like a fairly approximate trigger, but you put it to use. It went right in, which means in the largest sense that you were ready, and God is good and gives you every chance to heal and presents opportunities.
Okay, and life gives us that, not just me, right? It isn't that the life situation did it so much as my interpretation of it, right? So there's this inner wisdom, there's this Holy Spirit within each of us, there's this infallible guidance system within each one of us that will alert us when we've got, as Michael calls it, disintegrative energy in our system that's wreaking havoc without us knowing it.
Right.
So you don't have to attribute it to an outside force. You can say, oh, when there's pain inside, the higher self wants us to become aware of it so we can dismantle it. So it isn't that the situation happened. It's that I threw the interpretation on it to alert myself to the upset I was holding.
Michael
right?
calls
So my
it
higher self throws that interpretation on it to alert my egoic self. Go ahead. What were you going to say about Michael?
He talks about our levels of vitality have gotten to the point where we can be presented with that piece of work, and that previous to that, maybe we weren't vital enough to handle that. It's just another way of looking at it.
Yeah, and all I'm trying to do here is get away from the idea that there's some outside force that's manipulating the events in my life to wake me up to this or that. That it doesn't, because then you're just a step away from why did this happen, and I think it's far more productive to ask, what am I doing with what happened that I can make use of, rather than building some scenario with my conscious logical mind that's going to try and understand the flow of life for the last 13.84 billion years that brings me to this moment.
Yeah, that's very good to be reminded of that. I am definitely in the habit of doing the other, and it's good to stay within the self, capital S, which has it all in there.
So is it appropriate to turn on friend Ellen?
Sure.
Her microphone, that is. Ellen, welcome.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Tim. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. And yourself?
Good. Hi, Susan.
Hi.
I love the conversation that you guys are having about perception and the world that we see. And I just wanted to add someone else's teaching on this, because I think, it's been very helpful for me. And I think I've mentioned some of this before, but I think it also bears repeating. And this is what Walter Russell came to see, and what he learned from his transmissions from God are that there's two worlds, okay, and the Course talks about this too, right? There's two worlds. There's the real world, and then there's the world of illusions. And he said the real world is perfect stillness. Perfect stillness. The other world is constant motion. And, of course, it's the world of constant motion that is the illusory world. And he says that our body senses were made specifically to deceive us, so that we could experience the world of illusions. Because even space and time are illusions. And he said the only way that we can even perceive anything at all happening is because of the illusion of space and time, and the fact that our senses were made to only see one direction. So what he says is that, like, at the same time as you have, like, let's say a forward movement, there's also a simultaneous backward movement. They happen simultaneously, which means that they don't actually happen at all. But because of time, splitting them, apparently, it's just an appearance, splitting the forward motion and the backward motion apart, we see, let's say, the forward motion. And we only see the forward motion because our senses only see in one direction. So I just love the way he describes this, because it makes it so clear that everything that seems to be happening is actually not happening because it's being voided as it's happening. And I think this is why someone like Byron Katie has no problems with, a typhoon wiping out a whole island of people, because she understands that nothing bad can ever happen, because in actuality it's not even really happening. And so, it's because our senses are so limited and we believe what our senses tell us that we're like, oh no, this is wrong, this is good, this is bad. And meanwhile, it's none of those things. It's just a show, but we buy into it, and then we get, that's the cause of all of our suffering, because we think that horrible things are happening. And I just wanted to give his perspective of what he calls the world of illusions, which is the world of movement.
And there's the bird, a cardinal, deciding to concur wholeheartedly with you.
Oh, isn't that interesting that it happens to be a cardinal, because I have a special relationship with cardinals.
You got one chiming in on your call right now.
Yeah. And when the cardinal shows up, I know, like, I'm whatever it is I'm talking about or thinking about, it's like a confirmation. And there he is.
There it is in spades.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and of course, at a certain level, that is not helpful for some people, because they're living at that very practical level. And so, I have to put food on the table, and I have to keep my children from being abused by the bully or some abusive teacher, and I have to, at a certain level of experience, that kind of observation isn't useful. I like to talk about how I think this might have happened in a call years ago with Susan Bingham, but the idea was if I, there are all these different levels of reality going on, and if I have somebody who is, their car has broken down and they need that car to get to work so they can put food on the table and keep the mortgage paid so they can have a house for their family, and that person approaches me and says, hey, can you help me? My car's broken down. And I go into my best metaphysical, listen, buddy, it's a quantum world, and so your car and your body are made up of energy packets that pop in and out of existence. I'm not going to be very useful.
Right.
I wouldn't bring this up except for the fact that, you guys are having an in-depth discussion about this, and I thought... That's right,
and I think it's relevant at that level. Exactly. Yeah. I think it's relevant at that level. And so, I would help that person with, some car parts or some money or an Uber ride or whatever to help him or her get that job done. And then if they were still all kinds of woe is me and I can't believe, I'm taking them to their job in my car. This has happened several times to me over the years, where it just so happens that I live in on a road that's a fairly main thoroughfare. And so then I'm giving the person a ride, and I'm just hearing a little bit about their story. And if it's just, yep, these things happen, we'll get through it, I don't go anywhere with the story. But if they're like getting all bent out of shape and woe is me and I can't believe this is happening to me, and I might try and drop a little bigger truth on them just to say, hey, that's all true that these things happen, but also, isn't it great that you broke down right in front of my house and I happen to be here and I can give you a ride to work and you're there and you're not late, and things are going to work out better than you could imagine. That whole kind of, take a step up, level up in awareness to understand that there's more than one way to look at this situation. And so that's the kind of thing that I end up doing on a regular basis. When I'm able to understand the truth of what you're saying, that, there's always an action and a reaction, and there's always infinite possibilities, and they're all kind of happening at once, which also means they're not really happening the way I think they are. So whenever I am choosing a negative interpretation of it, then I can take a breath, take a step back, and ask, okay, how am I creating this negative experience? And if I want to take it to the Byron Katie level, I could say, okay, how am I choosing to believe a negative thought and therefore inducing suffering? Or if I take it to the Diedrich Wolsick level and I say, okay, when did I feel this before? Where are the origins of this emotion in me? And what are the negative beliefs about myself that I downloaded during the times when I felt this emotion most in the earliest parts of my life? When I start dismantling those false beliefs, when I start to see clearly that I'm the one creating my emotions and I don't need to keep creating the negative ones after I've discovered their roots, then my life starts to change for the better by leaps and bounds. And how could my life change for the better by leaps and bounds if I just have a recognition or a realization of what I've been doing with my thought, if life really was as solid as my thoughts tell me it is? Well, it couldn't. Right? So the truth is, life is malleable, and that my experience of life is an internal creation. And when I wake up and realize that, all kinds, an infinite number of possibilities open up for me. But until I realize that, I'm going to keep creating the belief that I'm bound by these physical experiences and these limitations of time and space, etc., and that my experience internally is created by the external events. And now it's a different bird chirping.
Yes, house finch. And I have I don't know if it's a mother or a father starling is feeding a baby right here. It's like, wow, all this activity going on.
Well, any other thoughts for you today, Ellen?
No, I just wanted to share, since the cardinal thing came up, I had the reason that I say I have a special relationship with cardinals is because prior to an awakening experience that I had, I was serenaded by a cardinal. And it was so clear. It was absolutely so clear that he was singing to me. And first he was in front of me, then he was to the side of me, then he was behind me, and every time I looked at him, he's staring straight at me and singing his heart out, and I was just dumbfounded. I had never had a bird sing to me like that before. And that was in the evening, and it got dark, so then I went inside, and the next morning, because it was on my back porch, I opened the window onto my back porch, and he immediately, there he was, he started singing again. And I was like, oh my God, he's still here. And then about half an hour later is when I had the experience, and I realized that he was my herald, and that, it just goes to show that things are not the way that you think that they are. I mean, these things happen that we think, can't possibly happen. I mean, and it was just amazing, and it was a beautiful experience, and it really caused me to look on everything differently. And so now I know whenever I start something seems out of the ordinary, just keep my eyes open, keep my mind open, because something is, potentially getting ready to be revealed to me.
Excellent. Well, that's a good idea for all of us to do that on a regular basis, especially when we have been prompted to interpret things in a way that gives rise to our negative emotions. So I thank you both for your comments and questions. It's lovely to hear from you both today. I'm going to mute you both so we can move on to our transition. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Ellen. And I'll remind us all that we come from love. We're made of this stuff we call love. We actually are love, and everything else is false. Welcome, Jeannie Rice.